I find myself extremely annoyed with The Acolyte. Now, unlike many of you and many on YouTube, I don't think the show is outright a waste, that it does nothing interesting. In fact, I find myself more often than not excited for each new weekly episode. However, behind all of The Acolyte's good ideas, there are some real execution issues which continue to drag it down, and many of these go to the core of Star Wars on TV. So, we've got The Acolyte, episode 7, maybe better than any episode, a great example of these issues. So, the episode was called Choice. It's another flashback episode, this time detailing the full story of what happened in episode 3, Destiny. Now, it's not right to say that Destiny outright lied to us, because it didn't. We didn't see false events, rather, we only saw part of the truth. And I'll return to this. What I think episode 7 does, which is interesting, is establish that the fall of May was really a product of Jedi doctrine, at least to a point. Now, this is something I went back and forth with several people on Twitter, including Jordan Mason. You can read our discussions there if you want. But what's interesting to me is that I describe this as being a full portrayal of the events. That's probably not quite true, but even though it is a full portrayal, we are still seeing the conflict here through a lens. This time, however, the lens of the Jedi. For example, we're led to believe that the witches are doing all of these evil things. The mark that May has over her eye is a dark mark, apparently. You know, Master Saul is concerned about the safety of the children, but really, at least based on what we know, that's premature and is more due to his misunderstanding of the practices of the witch. He's going at things from the perspective of a Jedi. He's assuming when in reality, most of what we've seen of the witches is actually relatively positive. Certainly, the head witch in charge cares about her children. And to be fair, even those like Mother Coral, who certainly accelerate the antagonistic nature between the two parties, she's doing so out of a genuine concern for her children, which, I mean, you can't say that's a bad thing. She doesn't want her children to be raised by Jedi. She's definitely got her own prejudices, and they're coming to life before her eyes. The Jedi aren't helping by continually showing up, barging their way in. They all have preconceived notions about each other, and it spirals until we get, massive combat, as we see in this episode. And I don't suspect we'll learn that Mother Coral was in reality working for the Sith, and that's a decision they do make. I think it really actually takes away from this idea. And it definitely is, and this goes back to the discussion I was having on Twitter, a sort of anti-colonialist message. The Jedi are barging in, bringing their own ideas and trying to rescue children who probably don't need rescuing. But what's kind of interesting is that the Jedi aren't actually pushing for this. The Council doesn't want the children to be rescued. Rescue in quotes there. They don't want the children to be messed with anymore. It's really Master Saul, who has become a fairly tragic character, actually a very tragic character, who honestly has personal failings for reasons I don't think we fully understand yet. And I'm not sure, I guess, what the ultimate goal of this show is here, especially as it relates to the Sith, who are obviously the other major component I haven't even talked about yet. Are we supposed to see Sol as solely a tragic figure who caused these events? Are we supposed to say that, the Jedi themselves have these structural failings which allow people to fail, which is a pretty interesting idea. You could say the prequels kind of have a similar message. And is that something the Sith of this era are taking advantage of, or maybe attempting to take advantage of? And we're starting to get to the heart now of my complaints as well, because if you've listened so far, you're probably thinking, everything you talked about, hey, that's pretty good. And yeah, I agree. That is pretty good. The problem is that's not all the show is, and I was talking to Corey, I'm sure we'll talk about this on my live stream tomorrow. Was the role of the Sith initially diminished just to show them attempting to take advantage of one Jedi fuck up and, continue the Order's slow spiral? Maybe. The problem is, I think the show has just spent so much time now with the Sith and just generally the actions of the Sith character, whether he's actually a Sith or not, have been by far the more compelling part of the show, at least for me personally. And I liked this episode. Initially I didn't, I will admit. On my second watch, I liked it a lot more. My main problem, however, is how it exists within the greater context of the show. It didn't just fall out of a coconut tree. We've got 8 episodes here. That's not a lot of time, especially where episodes have been short. I was already left feeling, upon watching it, that episode 3 was a waste. It told us very little information that we couldn't have already gleaned just from context clues in the prior 2 episodes, and completely diverting from the story to go back and tell us a partial story was already a mistake for episode 3. Now to do it again for episode 7, to have a further flashback of a flashback when we've only got 8 episodes to work with, it just doesn't make sense to me. There needs to be a better way to tell stories. There needs to be a better way to have Star Wars TV shows than this 8-part movie. I've said it every time. You guys should take a shot every time I bring up this same exact tired argument, but it's true, and it continues to be to the detriment of a show which otherwise has interesting ideas. And I guess now I'm just left wondering, how do they tell a compelling story with 1 episode left? How do they wrap up this season and tell a complete story like Leslie Headland wanted to? I mean, even the whole Osha May story feels like it can't be completed, because while their origin story was interesting, what's happened since for them hasn't really been. Like, we learned about their backstory, and the characters have kind of just been swapping allegiances, and I don't know, it just doesn't make sense to me. I'll maybe come back to this point, but I guess just other brief thoughts about the episode. Once again, to their credit, the Acolyte managed to dispel a talking point that a lot of people prematurely had about the Jedi accepting a too old student. This was obviously an extremely rare case where they accepted her because really there was no other option. On the topic of the Jedi sort of not understanding which power, I do really like how even the things which outwardly looked really evil were usually more benign. Like, the whole mind control thing wasn't torture, it wasn't trying to get him to turn on his Jedi. The witches were really just trying to get them to lead. Now, that also sort of turned back on them because it was that desire which at least partially caused Torben to make things go wild. But we also have the teleportation, which looks a lot more like the witches are about to kill, and that obviously led to Master Saul making a pretty grave mistake. The use of Kalnaka was less good. I mean, the witches and the Jedi both allowed things to get out of hand, and that was the witches probably taking things too far. I don't know whether Indara accidentally killed all of them or whether they're just knocked out. I'm assuming that she accidentally did kill them all by somehow severing their connection. So, sucks for them, I guess. Regarding the Vergence of the Force, I like the mention of the hyperspace disaster from the High Republic. I admittedly did fall off the High Republic. I'm no longer reading it. I've decided I won't be continuing with it for my podcast, Tapcaf Transmissions. But the hyperspace disaster was a major part of Phase 1. Kind of cool to hear it mentioned here. What is actually going on, I think, with May and Osha? Hopefully we get some confirmation next episode, and I think that will also partially determine how effective the sort of thematic messaging of episodes like this end up being in hindsight. The Kalnaka fight was also pretty cool. The song at the end, I actually like the song. I talked about this on my Clips channel. I think it's a great song, but I don't like it as a credits song. Anyway, that's all I've got. Let me know your thoughts on the episode. I'm sure you guys will have a normal one down below. Bye-bye.